This video contains spoilers for the Falcon and the Winter Soldier Episode 2 and potential spoilers for future episodes if our theories become a little too accurate. This week's episode formally introduced us to John F. Walker, a.k.a. U.S. Agent. Fan reactions to the character are mostly negative, as many claim that he is not the true Captain America. Last week, Professor Carnes claimed that the U.S. Agent will be the hero of the story. But this week, as you can see in the title of this video, I'll counter that by arguing why U.S. Agent is actually the antagonist of the story. So please, everyone, welcome back to another episode of So before we go on to all the debate about U.S. Agent, Professor Carnes, would you mind recapping us on what happened in last week's episode?
Sure. So here's a 30-second rundown of the episode. We start out seeing John Walker prepping for an interview at his old high school. We learn that he hates the spotlight. He can throw a shield like Cap. Bucky and Sam go on a mission to try to find Flag Smasher, whose identity we learn. The truck fight gets a little awkward when John Walker shows up with Battlestar. There's a really exciting highway sign moment where we realize when one of the sort of, background Flag Smashers burst through a highway sign, they're all super soldiers. We see a sort of version of John Walker after that in conversations with Battlestar and the protagonists, where he basically says Red Wing is government property. He's naive, he's smug, blah. We see for the first time, we hear about the Global Repatriation Council. We meet Lamar Hoskins, a.k.a. Battlestar, formally. We meet Carly Morgenthau, the sort of main flag smasher. Sam and Bucky meet Isaiah Bradley, which was, for me, a real surprise, and we can talk about that. He's a Black super soldier who was incarcerated in the comics in Fort Leavenworth after sort of breaking out of, sort of U.S. control. Sam is sort of hassled by the police. Marvel's kind of taking on some real issues related to race. Bucky gets arrested for missing therapy. John Walker bails him out, tries to convince him to sort of join the team. But there's a really kind of interesting couples therapy moment between Bucky and Sam. Yeah, they have some big breakthroughs. And we learn, and this is one of the things I'm really excited about, Power Broker is after the Flag Smashers. So we get really complicated villains again. We end with Bucky and Sam deciding to go see Zemo. This episode packs in so much content, so much plot, and so much to talk about.
So just to start us off, Professor Carnes, I know that you are on Team U.S. Agent. You believe that John F. Walker will be the hero of the story. What are some of the evidence you saw in this episode that facilitates your argument?
Well, so let's back up a second, because I didn't say I think he's going to be the hero of the story. We know who the heroes are. That's Sam and Bucky. This is Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I think, though, that the obnoxiousness that we're seeing in John Walker right now, that's a misdirect, and that he is going to come full circle. Like Phil Coulson, he's going to sacrifice himself, and we're all going to feel bad for thinking he was such a square and thinking maybe he was one of the bad guys. Here's my evidence. Number one, his arc looks a lot like Captain America. He really hates the spotlight. He just wants to get down to work. He doesn't actually want the fame or the glory. And he says that in a very private moment. We have no reason to think he's putting on, some sort of alternative persona. He just wants to do the good work, just like Cap. He is naive and smug at first. That's not quite a Captain America quality, but he has some early missteps in his super heroics. And that's not unlike Steve Rogers. He does, let me put it to you this way, to everyone on the call who's not on Team John Walker. What would Steve Rogers have done differently in the exact same situation? John Walker bails out Falcon, or bails out Winter Soldier, tries to get a Falcon, Winter Soldier, Battlestar, John Walker team up. And then when they say they're not going to play ball, he says, fine, stay out of my way. I'm going to do the job. What about that isn't exactly what Steve Rogers would do in the same situation?
Well, I'd like to, first of all, counter some of the arguments that are made here. So I know you first started off by saying that he's just a man who wants to do the right thing and he's like Cap. I would like to argue that the person who is most like Steve is actually Sam. I think his whole arc about, not wanting any merits, he doesn't want any publicity, he just wants to do the right thing, that's probably Sam. I agree that I think John Walker does. There's a good part in him that wants to do the right thing, but I noticed there's something wrong with his interactions with other people in those first scenes. He seems very self-indulgent into his past glory as a football player in his high school. Steve Rogers had a very rough start. He kind of started as this sort of in the low levels. He didn't really have any power. Nobody really liked him, treated him seriously. That is not John Walker. Also, the second biggest difference is that since we already have a Sam-like Cap character, I don't think Marvel's going to put another character like Steve into the show. So I think John Walker is going to be the very opposite of Steve. Yeah, he's very similar to Steve, but the question we got to ask ourselves is, what if Steve is evil? Like, what if Captain America takes missteps? There are certain flaws in his quality that makes him evil. And I think John Walker is going to show us that. There are several evidences in the episode that shows him that he's a flawed version of Captain America. I think he takes some good qualities from Cap, but his bad qualities, I think, will be his downfall in the rest of the season. So first we see that on the truck, he uses a gun to shoot somebody in the truck fight. Now, somebody is going to make the argument that, hey, Captain America used a gun in World War II, but I think the way these two scenes were presented are extremely different. Whereas you didn't really show Cap's victims when he was holding that gun, you do see U.S. agents shooting that person and that person getting really injured on top of that truck. And also when he says, stay out of my way, I don't deny that Captain America during Civil War is also kind of trying to get people to stay out of his way. But I think the difference there is that instead of explicitly telling Iron Man, you should stay out of my way, Cap actually tried to convince Tony to join him. He's like, Tony, the doctor, he's behind all of this. You got to see what the situation is about. Whereas John Walker's just simply like, you got to stay out of my way. I also think there are other aspects of U.S. agent that are really, really problematic. Why does he always show up at the most convenient time ever? Also, he works for the government. And we know that in this show, the government is supposed to be this sort of negative portrayal that I know kind of runs counter to what we did in the MCU research. So I think overall, I wouldn't say exactly that he is the exact same character as Captain America.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And to add on to Harry's point, I can't really see Steve Rogers being like, stay out of my way at the end of that conversation. I think there's a lot about U.S. agents' disposition that's just strikes me as a little odd. I mean, it seems like throughout the entire episode that despite all his actions being in line with what I think would make sense, it seems like he's pretending to be something that he's not. And I know that sort of comes with the whole territory of, I mean, obviously Captain America is a huge responsibility. But at the end of the day, I think that it goes back to what Dr. Erskine says in the first Captain America, which is the reason that Steve was chosen is not because he is special, it's because he was a good man. And there's a difference between wanting to be a hero and then being someone like Steve who never wanted to fight but wanted to protect people.
No, yeah, I feel like it's kind of that Captain America was chosen because he was a good person. John Walker just had a really impressive resume. And that's kind of like, that's what I got from it. And that's why he's like so arrogant. And yeah, that type of like pride and arrogance definitely was not found in Steve. Definitely wasn't one of like Captain America's strong points. So yeah, just that arrogance. And yeah, he just feels, there's something like that feels so fake about him that he's like putting on a show, which also just rubs me the wrong way. And again, I don't know about Harry's theory. I did not see him as like the big villain of the show. I guess I just see him as someone that's arrogant and prideful, who in the end will probably, like, this fault of his will probably result in his downfall. But I don't know about him being like this evil mastermind. But I don't know. I'll see what Harry has in store for us.
So just to be clear, so Sophia, you're saying you're kind of in between. So I'm saying he's probably going to be a minor hero. And I mean, Harry's previewing that he's going to tell us that John Walker is the big bad or something like that. You're kind of in between those. You're saying he's neither extreme.
Yeah, I think he's just someone that we're just meant to hate because he's kind of like arrogant, annoying, and like we've already seen. I don't know if you've seen like the backlash, like even the actors getting hate for it, which makes no sense whatsoever. But it's just like this hateable character that's arrogant who will probably have a sort of downfall, but I just see him as that. Yeah, definitely not a big bad guy, but if he becomes a hero, I don't see that.
Well, so I just want to, add another word of caution, like beware that confirmation bias. Like the things you're describing are, I agree. He's not Steve Rogers. He's not a weakling. He's not someone who, was chosen just because he was a good man. So far, he seems more awkward than malevolent. He seems more like bumbling or, whatever, kind of just, he has not grown into the role yet. I'm still looking for concrete evidence that he has these personal flaws. Like if we hold him up to the standard of like Sam or Steve, most characters are going to fall short of that. But we still haven't seen that, real kind of the avarice or, he seems sort of obnoxious and a little bit smarmy. We really know very little about his background, though. We know he was a football player. Okay, so he wasn't a weakling like Steve, who, but he was a football player, so we know he was strong. We know he was a war hero. We know he fell on multiple grenades. Although, to some of your points, he fell on grenades knowing that he would survive because he had a modified helmet. But he just hasn't done anything wrong yet. I sort of have like an innocent until proven guilty mindset. So I just want to I really think that they're setting us up to think that he's bad, and I don't want to go too far down that road until we see something that really kind of trends that way.
I will say that I don't think he's necessarily malevolent. I will reserve judgment until Harry presents his theory, but I don't think he's necessarily malevolent. I don't know if he's someone who's worthy enough for me to be calling him like, oh yes, the successor to Captain America, yay.
So I think that first of all, being an antagonist doesn't require you being malevolent. And I think the word malevolent, doesn't require somebody to be like evil villain who schemes to destroy the whole world or something like that. As you see, not all Marvel villains are like that. I think there is evidence that shows that he is a manipulative person. I think that scene with the psychiatrist is really, really suspicious. He just happens to show up at the most convenient time ever, almost knowing that Bucky's going to get arrested for not going to his psychiatrist meeting. Then he says, hey, look, who decided to end Bucky's therapy sessions? Me. It almost feels like he's also trying to win their trust to do something with him. And then later on, when Bucky says, we're not going to work with you, then he suddenly goes, oh, then stay out of my way. I think all of this seems extremely manipulative psychologically to get Sam and Bucky to work with him. I think what he wants to do, although you can say that he wants to do something right, I think his goal in this show is to become stronger because he doesn't have a super soldier serum. He's at the end of the day still just a normal guy. And remember when Carly and her gang are, transporting vaccines to different places, what if part of those vaccines are super soldier serums that John Walker wants? And that truck is not a rescue, but rather a hijack mission that US agent is doing. I think this is something that he wants to do. He wants to become a superhero, true superhero. And that's what makes him evil in this show, because he can do whatever it takes to become that super soldier.
Darn it, Harry, that's a pretty good theory.
I think there's something to the last point about the truck possibly being a hijack.
Mm-hmm.
I do sort of hesitate to call US agent manipulative just because nothing about his behavior towards Bucky or Sam seems surreptitious to me. But I do think that there's definitely merit to the theory about the vaccines, because it's definitely highly suspicious that we have this whole gang of super soldiers and randomly appearing now, and all of a sudden they're smuggling vaccines of all things.
No, yeah, that makes sense. And also like to his character, how we were talking about, he's kind of putting on this act, and we even said that he's awkward. He's definitely like not sure himself. Even though he's playing like this arrogant role, you can definitely tell he's still not fully comfortable in this, and maybe getting that power, that super strength is like his way of maybe I'll finally live up to Captain America, because he knows the high standards that he's on, and he knows not everyone sees him as the Captain America. So maybe like that's just kind of like unsure, him being unsure of himself will lead him to do this evil thing of maybe getting the serum and then actually becoming this Marvel bad guy.
Okay, you all, I'm becoming a little more convinced. Like, he's got motive. There are some facts that are just a little too coincidental, So, Bucky getting picked up. And am I right in remembering that Walker knows the therapist personally? Like when he sees her at in the jail scene, he sort of greets her as a friend. And yeah, Harry, you're right. That is all a little too coincidental. Bucky gets picked up for missing therapy, and Walker's there, moments, immediately there at the jailhouse. And he knows the therapist, so potentially, to the extent she's compromised, he's got access to all of Bucky's sort of personal secrets. And the therapist actually seems to me far more suspect than Walker, but his connection to her, like the therapist has done things that are already, I think, inappropriate. So, okay, I'm starting to come around.
That obsession to do what he thinks is right, to do whatever it takes, even hurting people, has turned him into a villain and has made him do evil things and malevolent things. I think that's exactly the kind of person U.S. Agent is. Because in the comics, he's always this really determined to do something, but that's his downfall because he's really arrogant about whatever it is that he sets his eyes to. And I think that seems exactly like the kind of person that he is in this show. And he wants to do whatever it takes to become a better hero, to become Captain America. I mean, all his stuff about, he's talking about, I just want to do what's right. I would believe that that's what he thinks from his perspective. But from our perspective, audiences, he will take extreme methods. I mean, he is a pretty violent character in the comics. We can see hints of that, that gun scene where he shoots that person. I think that shows that he's willing to use extreme methods. And another direct evidence that I think will make him turn evil is based on the toys that I have seen, the toy leaks. So that a few weeks ago, actually a week ago, we saw a toy leak of a series of action figures from the Falcon Winter Soldier. One of them is U.S. Agent. Now, we know that he's never referred to as U.S. Agent in the show, but the toy packaging refers to him as U.S. Agent. And unlike his on-show appearance, his costume from that toy packaging looks a lot more like his comics costume, which makes me think that U.S. Agent is going to have a dark turn towards the end of this season, and he's going to adopt his U.S. Agent costume and become U.S. Agent rather than Captain America, because we all know that Captain America has to be Sam. It must be Sam. But however, that brings me to another question that I would like to hear everyone's opinions on. So I think we can all agree that Carly will probably not be the main villain of the series. I know that there's some people defending her and the Flag Smashers, arguing that they're actually not the villains of the series. So where does that put her? And where does that put Zemo? Because the whole point why Zemo's in all of this is they want to investigate into Carly. But if we know that Carly's not going to be the final boss, then what is Zemo going to do in this whole situation?
I know, I do. There is always my theory about the Flag Smashers being old super soldiers that Zemo killed / didn't kill. But I don't necessarily think that's exactly correct. But the essence of it is that Zemo definitely is going to have a larger role in the story than he has thus far. I mean, Carly may be an instrument for the final villain, but I don't think she herself is going to fill the role.
Yeah, I mean, we saw a very sympathetic we saw Carly and the Flag Smashers on the run, and we saw, someone sacrifice their life to protect the group, which is, I was struggling to think of a time when we've ever seen, a villain behave that way in the MCU. So I agree that I'd be shocked at this point if the Flag Smashers or Carly end up being the big bad. And also, it's just much too early for that in the show. We've got Zemo, we've got Power Broker sort of lurking in the background, alluded to. I'm very confident we're going to see Power Broker represented on screen.
Carly kind of reminds me of like Scarlet Witch in Age of Ultron, kind of like someone in a terrorist organization, but it's like she's already painted kind of like in a sympathetic light, and you kind of like assume that she thinks she's doing the right thing or that she'll turn to the good side. Like right now, that's like what I'm getting from her. It kind of reminds me a lot of like of Scarlet Witch in Age of Ultron and Quicksilver. So that's why I'm kind of leaning towards that maybe she won't be this like they won't be like the main antagonist of the show.
I think what Zemo is doing here is very similar to what the Joker is going to do in The Dark Knight. I mean, you can see some parallels if my theory is correct. You have the Joker and Zemo, the evil mastermind, who are just completely evil people trying to manipulate everyone. You have John Walker and Harvey Dent, people who think they're doing the right thing. They want to do the right thing, but are willing to do whatever it takes to do the right thing. And once you have these two kind of people together, well, that's just disaster. You know what Joker said? Joker said, I want to expose Harvey Dent for who he truly is so that people don't believe in heroes anymore. That sounds exactly like what we hypothesized that Zemo was going to do. He says, I'm going to make the world not believe in superheroes anymore, because probably the lessons for Zemo learned in Endgame is that, yeah, you can have the heroes split with one another. You can have an alien warlord snap half the universe out. But as long as people have faith, even if that takes 5 years after a catastrophic event, they're still going to come back and do the impossible. I think Zemo learned that. And he's probably not going to do that anymore in this show. What he's going to do, he's going to manipulate US Agent, who's probably the most popular superhero in the MCU world right now, since he's the new Captain America, and drag him down into a villain level character. And we're going to see the end battle of this series, because Zemo can't fight Falcon and Bucky. He's not going to be in a lot of fight scenes. So the end fight scene is going to be US Agent versus Bucky and Sam.
That's an interesting theory. I have a lot of doubts about how they're framing US Agent concerning whether they're going to have this sort of downward spiral as his character arc. Because, I mean, going back to your analogy about comparing it to The Dark Knight, the whole reason why that's so effective in that movie is because it sort of works as this sort of meta tragedy for the audience, and that even though Harvey was a minor antagonist in terms of Bruce's romantic interest, it was never in doubt that he was a genuinely good man. I don't know if the US Agent had been presented to the audience in a way where it would feel like a loss to see any sort of outward regression throughout the show.
I really like this theory that, like, we're going to see sort of these lines cross, where US Agent is going to go from hero to villain, and Carly is going to go from villain to hero, and we're going to see them sort of, pass each other. And I actually think, this final showdown that we're talking about would be really neat to see Carly and the Flag Smashers and Sam and Bucky sort of teaming up against US Agent and Zemo and whatever forces they amass. But where in this theory is Power Broker? I want Power Broker. I want the full Power Broker story in the remaining 4 episodes. Although, it's, I guess my only concern about that is it going to seem too similar to AIM and Aldrich Killian and his whole scheme. But I'm just curious, is there a way to sort of wedge Power Broker? This story's already packed. Is there a way for Power Broker to be in this, or is that just going to be in the background? Power Broker basically, has access to technology that gives people superhuman abilities, but also mixes it in with like something like it's sort of a big metaphor for drug addiction. Mixes in something that people have to keep coming back to. They believe they're coming back to get sort of like an update but really he's just kind of selling them drugs in order to keep them addicted. But that perfectly fits with what we see. Carly and Flag Smashers are on the run. They've got this stuff. Power Broker's mad at them and they're trying to hide out. It may be that they've sort of figured out the scheme and they're trying to, those vaccines, I really believe those vaccines are super soldier serum. The vaccine part doesn't make any sense. And I think one character even said that, like, why are they moving vaccines around? So I think probably they've got a big, batch of super soldier serum. They're trying to get it away from Power Broker because they figured out that Power Broker is a villain. And they're taking some of it themselves sometimes to, fend off attacks from US Agent and Bucky and Sam, but they're ultimately probably going to be, it may be that they're not even villains in the end, that they're, they're misguided politically, but they're fully executing a plan to take super soldier serum away from a really menacing villain. So maybe that'll be what we'll learn about. That's a lot though. I mean, we've already, like, our theories just that we've talked about in the last 10 minutes would easily fill 4 great episodes. So that's why I'm sort of curious how they're going to pack all this in. Because like we still need to know what's going on with Sam's sister, who we haven't seen now. And a whole episode's gone by. We still haven't seen Taurus. We still, like, there's a lot of loose characters from episode 1 who we haven't revisited. And it's like, man, how are you going to do all that in 4 episodes?
I think one way that could make sense is they could do something similar to Daredevil season 3, where Kingpin kind of worked with a crime organization, corrupt FBI agents, and that's how he got his name Kingpin. I actually really, really liked how they did it. I think maybe Baron Zemo might do something similar, that when he was in jail, he had some contact, who knows how, with the Power Brokers, and the Power Brokers might be the ones who supply US Agent with his superpowers. So the Power Brokers are the benefactors, they're the one with the money. Zemo is the person with the brain, and US agent is the person with the strength. I mean, that's a pretty scary boss if you think about it, because I just keep thinking, what would the final boss battle in this show is going to be? Because if WandaVision taught us anything, is that no matter how crazy or different your story is going to go, there's always going to be a final boss battle in the end of every MCU movie / show. So what's the final boss battle going to look like? It's not going to be Carly versus Sam and Bucky. That's not going to happen. It's probably not going to be Power Brokers versus Sam and Bucky. Oh, maybe it is, but I feel like it isn't. It's definitely not going to be Zemo versus Sam and Bucky, because that battle will just end in a second. So I think the most likely scenario is Sam and Bucky versus US Agent. And that's a symbolic part of good Cap, Sam versus evil Cap, John Walker.
That would be very entertaining. Part of me wants you to be right, just because that would be a really satisfying. I like this constellation of villains that we've worked out: US Agent, Power Broker or Power Brokers, and Baron Zemo. It makes a lot of sense. And I think we learned from WandaVision, sometimes the obvious answer is the right one. As fun as the non-obvious theories are, it does look like it's shaping up the way you described. And the psychiatrist is somehow in on it all too. You know, maybe there's my crazy prediction. The psychiatrist is the Power Broker.
I was just about to say that. I support you 200% on this theory.
The psychiatrist was really, really bizarre. I mean, that's not the way any therapist behaves. In episode 1, that was really, really strange behavior. You want to talk like manipulative and controlling.
I love the theory that the psychiatrist is Power Broker. And we never found out her true name in the series, right? They never once referred to her by name.
No, she was just incredibly suspicious. The whole first episode was just so suspicious.
That is very suspicious, because I feel like in Marvel, if a character doesn't have a name, that name is probably going to be a reveal.
Mm-hmm. And that was something we learned from WandaVision. What goes unsaid, the part that is conspicuously left out is often the really important part. So speaking of manipulating people with subtle, persuasive efforts, you all have totally turned me around on John Walker. Now I've got a theory where, John Walker and the therapist are like already working together, and she's Power Broker and giving him his super soldier serum. So you're like my 3 Baron Zemos here, just completely reorienting my thinking.
So I think, one of the best things about this episode to me actually was the introduction of Isaiah. I did not expect them to go there in the first place, but I think the way they did it was even better. The whole it fits in perfectly narratively with like the whole sort of little plot of the episode where after they leave his house, you see them have the altercation with the police, Buck gets arrested and all of that. But beyond that, I think it was perfect timing to introduce them.
I was shocked. I really didn't think they were going to go there. And I agree. They wove Isaiah Bradley in so organically. And I mean, his character hits so hard emotionally. And I really didn't think they were going to pick up that piece of the comic book canon in this show. And it works really well. I kind of want to see him again. Like I want to see, and maybe that's unrealistic, but see some additional, development for him, or him somehow being connected back to the protagonist. But I think it's kind of implied that like that's he doesn't want anything to do with this group, and that's kind of that's a one and done kind of interaction.
I really want to see the ending that he's going to show up somehow in the final battle to fight the bad guys, and finally people recognize that there's a super soldier out there by the name of Isaiah Bradley, and he's going to get honored in the end of the season.
Well, I hope we'll get the return. I think that, Harry, what you described, that would be a really satisfying way to return to Isaiah Bradley somehow, because I don't think it makes any sense for him to like show up in the final battle and like team up with the heroes. I mean, he's really done. He's completely uninterested in joining their cause or even talking to them about it. But I think it'd be really fitting if we get, another scene at the Smithsonian where, he's in the exhibit alongside Steve Rogers. That would be really significant, I think.
Should we lock in our theories for this episode into what happens next in the season? I'm going to lock in that US Agent will be the final boss that they're going to physically fight. by the end of the season. He's going to actually become a US agent, have that costume change. And we're going to see Isaiah return by the end of the season. We're going to see the ending, you know, him being honored alongside Steve Rogers in the Smithsonian as Captain America. I think that's going to happen. I also think that Zemo, Power Brokers, and US agents somehow working together as this entire villainous organization. So that's going to be all of my theories for this week.
I'll just lock in since I just hate the therapist so much. I definitely think that the therapist and US agent are together and are planning something. So I'll lock in that.
I will lock in that US agent is at least a minor antagonist, and that the therapist is in some way contributing to the antagonist of the story. I think that's it.
And I'm going to lock in a modified version of my original theory, which is I'm going to grant that US agent is going to be a full-blown antagonist. You know, I've been convinced over the course of this show. I still want to hold on to that he's going to make some final sacrifice at the end, that there's some good in him, and that's going to come out at the end. So I give you that he's, you know, going to be used by Zemo and Power Broker to accomplish something really nefarious. But I think in the end, he's going to return to form, and I should say return and be some kind of a good guy. We're going to learn that he had good intentions. So not, we see, his wife and Battlestar turn against him reluctantly, but I think they're going to bring him back, and he's going to come back to that moral place at the end. So I'll lock in. My final prediction is just US agent will have a Scourge-like moment of redemption at the very end of the season.
Thanks again for tuning into another episode of Different Theories. Now, the Duke Independent Film Festival is happening April 9th, and the selection process is starting now. So keep an eye out for updates regarding DIFF. You can join DIFF today by liking our Facebook page, liking our Instagram page, filling in a form that will be on the internet sometime in the future. So keep an eye out for that too. We'll have more theories next week. Hopefully one of us is right, and instead of all of us being wrong next week. And it's going to be very exciting to see what Zemo is going to be up to. I think our center of our discussion next week is going to be on Zemo. So thank you guys again. I will see you next week.